I know where you live, Clara. I know when you leave for work. I know when you come home. And tonight I'll be waiting at your house." The line went dead. Clara's hands shook so violently that her phone slipped from her grip, clattering against the pharmacy counter. The fluorescent lights above her buzzed and flickered, indifferent to the terror flooding her veins. Around her, the ordinary sounds of the drugstore, the beeping registers, the muzak playing softly overhead, the shuffle of customers, suddenly felt like they belonged to another world. A world where women didn't receive death threats in the middle of their Tuesday afternoon shift. "Clara? Clara, honey, you look like you've seen a ghost." Margaret, her co-worker of 3 years, rounded the corner with a box of allergy medications. The older woman's face shifted from mild concern to alarm when she saw Clara's expression. "He called again," Clara whispered. Her voice came out strangled, barely recognizable as her own. "He said he'd be waiting at my house tonight." Margaret set the box down immediately. "That's it. We're calling the police. Right now." "I've called them 4 times, Margaret. 4 times." Clara pressed her palm against her forehead, fighting the wave of nausea rising in her throat. "They say without physical evidence of a threat, without him actually doing something, their hands are tied. He hasn't technically broken any laws." "Hasn't broken any laws? The man is terrorizing you." Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it, just the hollow sound of someone who'd already learned that the system designed to protect her had failed completely. "Detective Morrison told me to vary my routine and be vigilant. That's the official advice. Vary my routine." She'd been doing that for 6 weeks now. 6 weeks of looking over her shoulder. 6 weeks of jumping at shadows, of checking the locks on her doors 3 times before bed, of parking under streetlights and clutching her keys between her fingers like a weapon whenever she walked to her car. 6 weeks of slowly, methodically losing her mind, while a man she'd gone on 2 dates with dismantled her sense of safety, piece by piece. 2 dates, that's all it had been. 2 dinners with Kevin Marsh, a man she'd met through a dating app, a man who seemed perfectly normal until she'd politely declined a 3rd date. She hadn't felt a spark. She'd told him kindly. She'd wished him well. And then her nightmare had begun. "You can't go home tonight," Margaret said firmly. "Come stay with me and Richard." Clara shook her head. "I've already imposed on you twice this month, and besides," she swallowed hard, "he knows where you live too. He told me last week. He said he'd been watching me have coffee at your kitchen table." Margaret's face went pale. "Dear God." "I won't put you in danger." Clara straightened her spine, summoning whatever scraps of courage she had left. "I'll figure something out. I always do." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure she believed them anymore. By the time her shift ended at 7, Clara had formulated something resembling a plan. She would drive to the police station one more time. She would show them the call log, the timestamps of his previous calls, the notes she'd kept documenting his harassment. She would beg them to do something, anything, before Kevin made good on his promise. The evening air was cool against her face as she pushed through the pharmacy's back entrance into the employee parking lot. October had arrived with its early sunsets, and darkness was already creeping across the sky, turning the world into shades of gray and shadow. Clara's car sat alone at the far end of the lot, a modest Honda Civic that had seen better days. She'd requested the spot closest to the door weeks ago, but her manager had denied the request. "We can't give special treatment based on personal issues," he'd said, as though being stalked was simply a personal issue, like a messy divorce or a sick relative. Her heels clicked against the asphalt as she walked, her purse clutched tight against her side, her keys already in her hand. She was halfway to her car when she noticed it. A folded piece of paper tucked beneath her windshield wiper. Clara's blood turned to ice. She approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. With trembling fingers, she reached out and plucked the paper free. 3 words, written in red ink. "Behind you, Clara." She spun around. Kevin Marsh stood 15 feet away, emerging from behind a delivery van like a spider crawling out from the darkness. He was smiling, that awful, self-satisfied smile she'd come to know so well from the photographs he'd started sending her. Photographs of herself, walking to work, buying groceries, sitting in her living room, unaware that he was outside her window, watching. "Hello, Clara," he said softly. "I told you I'd be waiting. Stay away from me." Her voice cracked, but she held her ground. "I'm warning you, Kevin. The police know about you. They have your name, your picture, everything." "The police!" He laughed, a low, mocking sound. "The police don't care about you, Clara. No one cares about you. That's why you're so alone. That's why you need me." "I don't need you. I don't want you." His smile vanished. In its place came something cold, something cruel, a flash of the rage that lived beneath his carefully constructed exterior. "You don't get to decide that," he said quietly. "I've invested time in you, Clara. I've been patient. And now it's time for you to come with me." He took a step closer. Clara stepped back, her shoulders bumping against her car door. She was trapped. "Don't come any closer. I swear to God." "Kevin, God's not going to help you." Another step. His hand reached into his jacket pocket, and Clara caught the glint of something metal. "No one's going to help you. It's just you and me now." This was it, she realized. This was how it ended. Not with a rescue, not with justice, but alone in a parking lot with a man who'd decided he owned her. And then, from somewhere in the shadows, a voice spoke. "Actually," the voice said calmly, "it's not." Kevin froze. Clara's eyes darted past him, searching for the source of the voice, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. A man stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of his dark suit jacket. His hair was black, swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth set in a hard, unsmiling line, but it was his eyes that stopped Clara cold. They were gray, pale as winter frost, and they were fixed on Kevin with an expression of absolute lethal calm. He wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, both equally large, both wearing suits that did nothing to disguise the danger radiating from them, like heat from a furnace. "Who the hell are you?" Kevin demanded, but his voice had lost its confidence. There was fear in it now, real fear. The man in front didn't answer. He just kept walking, his steps slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving Kevin's face. When he spoke again, his voice was soft, almost conversational, but something in it made Clara's skin prickle with instinctive recognition. This was a man who was used to being obeyed. This was a man who didn't make threats. He made promises. "I'm going to give you one chance," the man said. "Walk away. Get in your car. Drive, and don't stop until you've left this city. Don't come back. Don't call her. Don't think about her. Forget she exists." Kevin's face twisted with indignation. "You can't just, she's mine. I've been watching her for weeks. You have no idea." "I know exactly who you are." The man stopped walking. He was close to Kevin now, too close for comfort, too close for safety. "Kevin Marsh, 34 years old, accountant at Whitmore Financial. You live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on Greenfield Avenue. You drive a black Nissan Altima, license plate JKL 4492. You were questioned for harassment in 2019, but never charged." The woman dropped the complaint. A pause. She shouldn't have. Kevin's face went white. "How do you—" "I know everything." The man's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried perfectly in the still night air. "I know what you do, where you go, who you talk to. And if you ever come near Clara Weston again, if you so much as speak her name, I will find you. And what happens after that won't be quick, and it won't be painless. Do you understand me?" Clara watched, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, as Kevin's face went through a series of rapid transformations. anger, disbelief, fear, and finally, submission. Fine, Kevin spat. Fine, she's not worth this anyway. No, the man said quietly. She's worth more than you could ever comprehend. That's why you're still breathing. Now go! Kevin turned and fled. His footsteps echoed across the parking lot, fast and frantic, and a moment later Clara heard the roar of an engine as he peeled out of the lot and disappeared into the night. Silence fell. Clara stood frozen, her back still pressed against her car, her keys digging painfully into her palm. Her mind was reeling, struggling to process what had just happened, struggling to reconcile the terror of moments ago with the sudden, shocking calm of now. The man turned to face her. Up close, he was even more intimidating, and she realized with a strange flutter in her chest, even more striking. His features were severe, almost harsh, but there was something compelling about them, something that made it impossible to look away. He studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost none of its quiet intensity. "Are you all right?" Clara opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Yes, I think so. Thank you. I don't..." She shook her head, struggling to find words. "Who are you? How did you know my name? How did you know about Kevin?" For the first time, something flickered across his face, something almost like amusement, though it was gone so fast she might have imagined it. "My name is Marcus Calder," he said, "and I know about Kevin because I make it my business to know about men like him." "Your business?" He didn't answer that directly. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, slowly, deliberately, so as not to startle her, and produced a small white card. He held it out to her. Clara hesitated for just a moment before taking it. The card was plain, elegant, with nothing on it but a phone number embossed in black. "If he contacts you again," Marcus Calder said, "call that number. Day or night, someone will answer." "But," Clara looked up from the card, confusion and curiosity warring in her chest. "I don't understand. Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, just a slight softening around his eyes, a barely perceptible change in the set of his jaw. But Clara saw it, and it made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "No," he said quietly, "I don't. But I know what it's like to be hunted. And I know that no one should have to face that alone." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, his men falling into step behind him. A black car materialized at the edge of the parking lot, sleek, expensive, its windows tinted so dark they were nearly opaque, and Marcus Calder climbed inside without looking back. The car pulled away, its taillights glowing red in the darkness, and then it was gone, swallowed by the night as completely as if it had never been there at all. Clara stood alone in the empty parking lot, the wind tugging at her hair, the card clutched in her hand like a lifeline. For the first time in 6 weeks, she didn't feel afraid. She felt something else entirely. 3 days passed. 3 days of silence. No calls, no letters. No photographs slipped under her door. No shadows lurking outside her window. For the first time in weeks, Clara slept through the night without waking in a cold sweat, without lying rigid in the darkness, straining to hear footsteps that might or might not be there. Kevin Marsh was gone. Whatever Marcus Calder had said to him, whatever promise he'd made, it had worked. But Clara couldn't stop thinking about him. She told herself it was gratitude. She told herself it was simply the natural response to someone who'd saved her from a terrifying situation. She told herself a lot of things, but none of them explained why she kept taking that white card out of her wallet and staring at the phone number, her thumb hovering over her phone's screen, wondering what would happen if she called. Who was he? The way he'd moved, the way he'd spoken. There had been something about him that went beyond mere confidence. He'd had the air of a man who operated outside the normal rules, who lived in a world where power wasn't given, but taken. And those men with him, bodyguards? Associates? They'd deferred to him with the unspoken respect of soldiers following a commanding officer. Marcus Calder. She'd searched the name online and found nothing. No social media profiles. No business listings. No news articles. It was as though he didn't exist. Or as though he'd made sure that he couldn't be found. On the morning of the 4th day, Clara was halfway through her shift at the pharmacy when Margaret appeared at her register, her eyes wide. "There's a delivery for you," Margaret said. "A man just dropped it off. Clara, you need to see this." Clara followed her co-worker to the back room, her pulse quickening with a familiar surge of anxiety. Please, she thought. Please let it not be him. Please let it be over. But what waited for her on the break room table wasn't a threat. It was flowers. An enormous bouquet of white roses, easily 3 dozen of them, arranged in a crystal vase that probably cost more than Clara made in a week. They were exquisite, perfect, flawless blooms, their petals soft as silk, their fragrance filling the room with sweetness. A small envelope was tucked among the stems. Clara reached for it with trembling hands and pulled out a card. The message was brief, written in precise, elegant handwriting. Dinner. Tonight. 7 p.m., the Ashford Hotel. The car will come for you at 6:30. Mems. Clara stared at the card. Her heart was beating very fast now, but not with fear. Something else was thrumming through her veins. Something electric. Something dangerous. Something that felt very much like anticipation. Clara? Margaret was watching her with open curiosity. Who sent these? Clara looked up from the card. She thought about the last 3 days of silence. She thought about the sound of Marcus Calder's voice in that parking lot, the look in his eyes when he'd told her she was worth more than Kevin could ever comprehend. I don't know, she said slowly, but I think I'm going to find out. At 6:30 exactly, a black car pulled up outside Clara's apartment building. She'd changed clothes 4 times. She'd done her makeup twice. She'd nearly talked herself out of going at least a dozen times. But here she was, stepping out into the cool evening air in a deep blue dress she'd bought 2 years ago and never worn. Her hair swept up off her shoulders, her heart pounding with a cocktail of nerves and excitement. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit who looked like he could bench press her car, opened the rear door without a word. Clara climbed inside. The interior was all leather and polished wood, with tinted windows that turned the outside world into shadows. Clara ran her fingertips across the seat, marveling at the softness of the material, at the quiet purr of the engine as the car pulled away from the curb and merged into traffic. She'd never been in a car like this. She'd never been sent flowers like those. She'd never been summoned to dinner by a mysterious stranger who'd appeared out of the darkness to save her from a stalker. This wasn't her life. This was something out of a movie, something out of a dream. The Ashford Hotel materialized before her like a palace rising from the urban landscape. It was all marble and glass and glittering chandeliers, the kind of place Clara had walked past 100 times without ever imagining she'd step inside. The driver opened her door, and she emerged onto a red carpet that led to gleaming brass doors. Miss Weston, said a man in an impeccable suit, materializing at her elbow. Mr. Calder is expecting you, right this way. Clara followed him through the lobby, past guests in evening gowns and tailored tuxedos, past a grand staircase that swept upward like something out of a fairy tale. She felt out of place, a sparrow among peacocks, but she kept her chin up and her shoulders back. She'd survived 6 weeks of terror. She could survive a fancy dinner. The man led her to a private elevator, which whisked her up to the top floor. The doors opened onto a corridor with only one door at the end, and Clara knew without being told that this was the penthouse. She took a breath, and then she knocked. Marcus Calder opened the door himself. He was dressed differently tonight. No suit jacket, just a charcoal gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms roped with muscle and marked with the edges of tattoos that disappeared beneath the fabric. His dark hair was slightly less controlled, a few strands falling across his forehead, and for a moment Clara caught a glimpse of someone younger beneath the mask of power. Someone almost human. "You came," he said. "You didn't give me much choice." Clara lifted her chin. The car, the flowers, it was all very presumptuous. A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Was it? Most men ask before sending a car to a woman's house. Most men aren't me. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. "Would you like to come in, Miss Weston? Or would you prefer to continue chastising me in the hallway?" Clara hesitated for just a moment, and then she walked past him into the penthouse. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, the lights glittering like diamonds against the velvet darkness. The furniture was sleek and modern, all clean lines and rich fabrics, but there were personal touches too. Books stacked on a coffee table, a chess set mid-game, a piano in the corner with sheet music open on the stand. "Can I pour you a drink?" Marcus asked, moving toward a bar cart near the window. "I don't usually drink with men I don't know. Then ask me what you want to know." He poured 2 glasses of red wine anyway, then turned to face her. "I'll answer honestly." Clara studied him. He was watching her with those pale gray eyes, his expression unreadable, his body utterly still. He looked like a man who had nothing to hide, and yet everything about him suggested secrets buried deep. "Who are you?" she asked finally. "And don't tell me you're just someone who helps people. The way those men listened to you, the way Kevin looked at you, you're not just some good Samaritan." For a long moment, Marcus didn't respond. He crossed the room toward her, slow and deliberate, until he was close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and woodsy, with hints of smoke. He offered her one of the wine glasses. "I run an organization," he said quietly. "We operate in areas where the law tends to look the other way. Import, export, security services, among other things." Clara's stomach tightened. She knew what he was saying without him having to spell it out. "You're a criminal." "I'm a businessman. The distinction is mostly a matter of perspective." He sipped his wine, watching her over the rim of the glass. "Does that frighten you?" She should say yes. She should set down this wine, walk out that door, and never look back. A smart woman would run from this. A sensible woman would recognize danger when it was standing right in front of her. But Clara had spent 6 weeks being hunted by a man who hid behind a veneer of normalcy, who used the system against her, who weaponized the gaps in the law to torment her with impunity. And this man, this criminal, this shadow king, had stopped him in 5 minutes. "No," she said slowly. "It doesn't frighten me." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. It was subtle, a flicker of heat in those cool gray eyes, a slight parting of his lips. But Clara felt it like a physical touch, like electricity crackling across her skin. "Dangerous answer," he murmured. "I'm tired of being afraid." She took a step closer, closing the distance between them. Her heart was racing now, but not with fear. With something else. Something that felt like waking up after a long sleep. "You asked me to dinner. So let's have dinner. And you can tell me why you really helped me, and why you're still helping me, and what any of this has to do with whatever it is you actually want." For a long moment, Marcus just looked at her. And then, slowly, he smiled. It transformed his face. The severity softened, the coldness melted away, and what remained was something warm and almost boyish. A flash of the man beneath the armor. "I think," he said quietly, "this is going to be a very interesting evening." They ate on the balcony, under a canopy of stars. The food was extraordinary. Dishes Clara couldn't even name, each one more exquisite than the last, but she barely tasted any of it. She was too focused on the man across from her, on the story unfolding with every careful revelation he offered. Marcus had grown up with nothing. His father had been a dock worker who died in an accident when Marcus was 12. His mother had worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. He'd started running errands for local crime figures as a teenager, and by the time he was 20, He'd clawed his way into their ranks through sheer intelligence and ruthless determination. Now, at 42, he controlled one of the most powerful organizations on the eastern seaboard. "I'm not going to pretend I'm a good man," he said, refilling her wine glass. "I've done things that would horrify you. I've made choices that can't be undone. But I live by a code. I don't hurt innocents. I don't tolerate cruelty for its own sake. And I don't look away when someone needs help." "Is that why you helped me?" Clara asked. "Because you live by a code?" Marcus set down the wine bottle. He looked out at the city skyline for a moment, his jaw tight, and when he turned back to her, there was something raw in his expression, something unguarded. "No," he said quietly. "I helped you because I saw the police reports. I saw what that man was doing to you, and I saw that no one was stopping him. And I thought—" He stopped, took a breath. "I thought about what it would feel like to be that alone, that afraid, that helpless." Clara's throat tightened. "You felt that way?" "Everyone has, at some point." His eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "I also helped you, because from the moment I read those reports, I couldn't stop thinking about you, about what kind of woman keeps going to work every day when she's being terrorized, about what kind of strength that takes. And I wanted—" Another pause. "I wanted to meet the person who had that kind of courage." The air between them felt charged, electric. Clara's pulse was hammering in her throat, and she knew that she was standing on the edge of something, a precipice, a point of no return. "This is crazy," she whispered. "I don't know you. You don't know me." "I know enough." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were warm and strong, his grip gentle but firm. "I know you're brave. I know you're kind. I know you deserve better than what life has given you so far." He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "And I know that I want to be the one who gives it to you." Clara should pull away. She should thank him for dinner, for the rescue, for everything. And then she should go back to her ordinary life and forget any of this ever happened. But she didn't want an ordinary life anymore. She didn't want to go back to being the woman who was hunted, who was helpless, who was alone. She wanted to be someone new. "One condition," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Name it. No more secrets. Not between us. If this is going to be something, if we're going to be something, then I need to know who you really are. All of it. The good and the bad." Marcus studied her for a long moment, and then he nodded, slow and solemn, like a man making a vow. "All of it," he agreed. "The good and the bad." Clara smiled, and then she leaned across the table and kissed him. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Clara had never experienced anything like it. The rush, the intensity, the feeling of being swept up in something so much bigger than herself. Marcus was overwhelming in the best possible way, attentive, protective, passionate. He sent her flowers every day, not always roses, but wildflowers, orchids, sunflowers, whatever struck his fancy, and he called her every morning and every night, just to hear her voice. He took her to restaurants she'd never heard of, to galleries and opera houses and private clubs that existed in a world she hadn't known existed. But he also kept his promise. He told her about his business, the real business, the one that operated in shadows and back rooms and offshore accounts. He told her about the rivals who wanted him dead, about the law enforcement agencies that had been trying to build a case against him for years, about the dangers that came with the territory. He told her about the violence, about the men who worked for him, about the code that governed everything he did. And Clara listened. She asked questions. She pushed back when she disagreed, challenged him when she thought he was wrong. She wasn't naive. She knew what she was getting into, knew that this world was dangerous, knew that loving a man like Marcus meant accepting things that most people never had to confront. But she also saw the other side of him, the side that read poetry and played Chopin on his piano at midnight, the side that visited his mother's grave every Sunday and donated anonymously to shelters for domestic violence survivors. The side that looked at Clara like she was the only woman in the world, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. She was falling for him, hard and fast and completely. And she knew he was falling too. It was on a Saturday night, exactly 2 months after their first dinner at the Ashford, that everything changed. Clara was at Marcus's penthouse. She'd started spending more nights there than at her own apartment, when his phone rang. She watched his face as he answered, watched the color drain from his skin, watched his jaw go tight with fury. "When?" he demanded. "Where is he now?" A pause, and then, "I'm on my way." He hung up and turned to Clara, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. "What is it?" she asked, rising from the couch. "Marcus, what's wrong?" "Kevin Marsh," Marcus said, his voice flat and cold. "He's back." Clara's blood turned to ice. "He left the city," she whispered. "You made him leave." "He came back 3 days ago." Marcus crossed to a cabinet and opened it, revealing a safe. He punched in a code and extracted a handgun, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. "My men have been tracking him. He's been watching your apartment, photographing you again. And tonight," his hand tightened on the gun, "tonight he bought a knife." Clara's knees buckled. She would have fallen if Marcus hadn't been there, catching her, holding her upright. His arms wrapped around her like a shield, and she buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, trying to anchor herself against the tide of terror threatening to pull her under. "I won't let him touch you!" Marcus said fiercely. "Do you hear me? I will never let him touch you." "What are you going to do?" He pulled back far enough to look into her eyes. What she saw there was absolute, unwavering, terrifying in its intensity. "I'm going to end this," he said. "Tonight." The plan was simple. Clara would go home to her apartment and follow her normal routine. Marcus's men would be watching from hidden positions around the building, ready to move the moment Kevin showed himself. Marcus himself would be waiting inside Clara's apartment. "You're using me as bait," Clara said as they drove through the darkened streets. "Yes." Marcus didn't sugarcoat it. "It's the fastest way to draw him out, but you won't be in danger. I'll be there before he even gets through the door." "And then what?" Marcus looked at her. His expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes, something dark and final, gave her the answer. "Marcus," she grabbed his arm, "you can't. If you kill him, he forfeited his life the moment he decided to come back for you. But the police will never find him." Marcus's voice was quiet, certain. "Trust me." Clara opened her mouth to argue, to protest, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, she didn't want to argue. After everything Kevin had put her through, after all the nights of terror, after the system had failed her again and again and again, some part of her wanted this. Some part of her wanted it to be over, once and for all, no matter what that meant. What did that make her? The car stopped outside her building. Clara took a shaky breath. "Marcus." "Yes?" "Be careful." He leaned across the seat and kissed her, hard, deep, with an urgency that felt like a promise. "I'll see you soon," he murmured against her lips, and then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows like he'd been born to them. Clara went inside. Her apartment felt different tonight, charged, expectant. Like the air before a storm. She moved through her routine mechanically, turning on lights, drawing curtains, changing out of her work clothes. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow made her skin prickle. But Marcus was here. She knew he was here. She could feel him, somewhere in the darkness, waiting. An hour passed. Then 2. Clara was sitting on her couch, pretending to read a book, when she heard it. A sound at the door. The soft, careful sound of someone trying to pick the lock. Her heart stopped. The door swung open. Kevin Marsh stepped inside. He looked worse than she remembered. Thinner, paler, with dark circles under his eyes, and a wildness in his expression that hadn't been there before. In his right hand he held a knife. The blade gleamed in the lamplight. "Hello, Clara," he whispered. "I told you I'd be back." Clara stood up slowly. Her legs were trembling, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Kevin, you need to leave. Now." "Leave?" He laughed, that awful, hollow laugh. "I'm never leaving. You're mine, Clara. You've always been mine. And if I can't have you," he raised the knife, "no one will." He took a step toward her, and that's when Marcus emerged from the hallway. He moved like a ghost, silent, lethal, appearing from nowhere. One moment Kevin was advancing on Clara. The next, Marcus had him by the throat, slamming him against the wall so hard the pictures rattled. "Drop it," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kevin's eyes bulged. The knife clattered to the floor. "You thought you could come back," Marcus continued, his grip tightening. "You thought you could finish what you started. But here's what you failed to understand." He leaned in close, until his mouth was an inch from Kevin's ear. "She was never yours. She was never going to be yours. And now," a pause, "now you're going to disappear." "Please," Kevin gasped. "Please, I'll leave. I'll never come back, I swear." "You already made that promise. You broke it." Marcus looked at him with something that might have been pity if it weren't so cold. "I don't give second chances." He released Kevin's throat, and in the same motion drove his fist into the man's temple. Kevin crumpled like a puppet with cut strings, unconscious before he hit the floor. Silence fell. Clara stood frozen, her hand pressed to her mouth, her whole body shaking. Marcus straightened and turned to face her, and for a long moment they just looked at each other across the space of her small living room. "It's over," Marcus said quietly. "He's never going to hurt you again." Clara's vision blurred with tears. Relief, terror, gratitude, horror. Everything crashed over her at once, a tidal wave of emotion that left her gasping. She stumbled forward and Marcus caught her, pulling her into his arms, holding her tight. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "I've got you. You're safe." "What happens now?" she whispered. "My men will take him. He'll be handled." He pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away her tears. "You don't need to know the details. You don't need to carry that. Just know that it's done." Clara nodded. She should feel something, guilt, maybe, or revulsion. But all she felt was relief, bone-deep, overwhelming relief. Kevin Marsh was gone, forever, and she was free. 6 months later, Clara stood on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out at a city transformed by spring. So much had changed since that night. She'd quit her job at the pharmacy and taken a position at a nonprofit that helped survivors of domestic violence and stalking. Work that felt meaningful, that made her feel like she was turning her pain into something useful. She'd sold her old apartment and moved into the penthouse with Marcus, filling its sleek modern spaces with warmth and color and life. And she'd learned to live in his world. It wasn't always easy. There were things she couldn't know, meetings she couldn't attend, aspects of his business that remained in shadow. There were nights when he came home with blood on his knuckles and a darkness in his eyes that took hours to fade. There were enemies, always, circling at the edges, people who would use her to hurt him if they could. But there was also this, the way he looked at her every morning like she was a miracle. The way he held her at night like she was precious. The way he'd changed for her, not the core of who he was, but the edges, the sharp parts becoming softer, gentler, more willing to let someone in. She loved him. Completely, irrevocably, against all reason. And he loved her. Deep thoughts? Marcus appeared beside her on the balcony, sliding an arm around her waist. He was dressed casually tonight, dark jeans, a white shirt with the collar open, and the sight of him still made her pulse quicken. "Just thinking about how different my life is now," she said, "compared to a year ago." "Better or worse?" She turned to face him, rising on her toes to press a kiss to his jaw. Better? So much better? He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that she'd learned to treasure. Good, because I have something I want to ask you. Clara's heart skipped. You do? I do. He took her hands in his expression turning serious. Clara, when I met you, I thought I knew who I was. I thought I knew what my life was going to be. And then you walked into it, and everything changed. He brought her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. You made me want to be better. You made me believe I could be. And I don't want to spend another day without you knowing exactly what you mean to me. He released her hands and reached into his pocket, and when he withdrew it, he was holding a small velvet box. Clara's breath caught. Marcus opened the box, revealing a ring. It was beautiful, a simple band of white gold with a single diamond that caught the light like a captured star. But it wasn't the ring that made her eyes fill with tears. It was the look on his face, the vulnerability, the hope. Clara Weston, he said quietly, will you marry me? For a moment she couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, her heart too full. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, frightened, alone, convinced that no one was coming to save her. She thought about everything she'd survived, everything she'd overcome, everything she'd become. And she thought about this man, this dangerous, complicated, extraordinary man who'd walked out of the shadows and changed her life forever. Yes, she whispered, and then louder, yes, yes, I'll marry you. Marcus's face broke into the most radiant smile she'd ever seen. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and slow and full of promise. Around them the city glittered and hummed, a world of strangers going about their lives, unaware that here, on this balcony, something new was beginning. Clara Weston had spent her whole life waiting to be rescued. But in the end, she'd found something better. She'd found someone who saw her strength, who matched her fire, who loved her not in spite of her scars, but because of them. She'd found her equal. She'd found her home. And as Marcus held her under the stars, Clara knew, with absolute, unshakable certainty, that this was just the beginning. Their story was far from over. It was only getting started. The wedding was 3 weeks away when Clara's world shattered again. She was alone in the penthouse, curled up on the couch with a cup of tea and a stack of seating charts that were giving her a headache. Marcus had left an hour ago for what he'd called a routine meeting, something about a shipment dispute with a supplier in New Jersey. He'd kissed her forehead, told her not to wait up, and disappeared into the elevator with 2 of his men flanking him like shadows. Clara had grown used to nights like this. She didn't ask questions she didn't want answers to. She trusted Marcus to come home to her, and he always did. But tonight felt different. She couldn't explain it, just a prickling at the back of her neck, a tightness in her chest that wouldn't ease. She kept glancing at her phone, waiting for a text that didn't come. She kept listening for the sound of the elevator, the turn of a key. Nothing. By midnight, she was pacing. By 1 a.m, she was calling his phone. It went straight to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Her hands were shaking now. She called Thomas, Marcus's head of security, a man built like a tank who'd become something like a friend over the past 6 months. He answered on the second ring, and the tension in his voice made Clara's blood run cold. Clara, stay where you are. Don't leave the penthouse. Thomas, what's happening? Where's Marcus? A pause that lasted too long. There was an ambush, Thomas said finally. At the meeting site. Someone talked. Someone on our side. They were waiting for him. Clara's knees gave out. She grabbed the back of the couch to keep from falling. He's alive. Thomas's voice was hard, clipped. But they took him. We don't know where. We don't know who. But we're going to find out. and we're going to get him back. The line went dead. Clara stood frozen in the middle of the penthouse, the phone still pressed to her ear, her mind refusing to process what she'd just heard. Marcus, her Marcus, the man who controlled an empire, the man who'd made a stalker disappear without a trace, had been taken. Someone had him. Someone was hurting him right now, this very moment, while she stood here helpless and useless and alone. No, she wasn't going to do this. She wasn't going to be the woman who waited by the phone, who wrung her hands and hoped for the best. She'd spent too much of her life being that woman. She'd spent too much of her life being powerless. Not anymore. Clara grabbed her jacket and headed for the door. The warehouse district was dark and silent at 2 a.m, the streets empty except for the occasional patrol car or delivery truck. Clara had taken a cab to an address Thomas had reluctantly given her, a safe house where Marcus's inner circle was gathering to coordinate the search. The building looked abandoned from the outside, but when Clara pushed through the rusted door, she found a room full of hard-faced men staring at computer screens and arguing in low, urgent voices. Maps were spread across tables. Phones were ringing. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and barely contained panic. Thomas saw her first. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his expression caught between relief and fury. "I told you to stay at the penthouse. And I told you I'm not going to sit there doing nothing while the man I love is being tortured somewhere." Clara held his gaze, refusing to back down. "I know I'm not one of you. I know I don't belong here, but I'm not leaving. So either put me to work or get out of my way." For a long moment, Thomas just stared at her. And then, slowly, something shifted in his face. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "All right," he said quietly. "Then let's get to work." The next 12 hours were the longest of Clara's life. She did what she could, answering phones, organizing information, running coffee to men who hadn't slept in days. She listened as theories were proposed and discarded, as leads were chased and hit dead ends, as the tension in the room ratcheted higher and higher with every passing hour. And through it all, she thought about Marcus. She thought about his hands, strong and gentle, capable of violence and tenderness in equal measure. She thought about his voice, the way it softened when he talked to her, the way it hardened when he was protecting her. She thought about his eyes, those pale gray eyes that had seen so much darkness, but still looked at her like she was light. She couldn't lose him. She couldn't. It was late afternoon when the break finally came. A man named Donovan, one of Marcus's lieutenants, a quiet, intense man with a scar across his cheek, burst through the door with a laptop in his hands and triumph blazing in his eyes. "I found them," he said. "I traced the leak back to Grayson. He's been feeding information to the Morettis for months, and I know where they're keeping Marcus." The room erupted into motion. Thomas started barking orders, assembling a team, coordinating logistics. Men grabbed weapons and body armor, moving with the practiced efficiency of soldiers preparing for war. Clara grabbed Thomas's arm. "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not. This is going to be a war zone." "I don't care." She tightened her grip. "I have to be there, Thomas. I have to see him. Please." Thomas looked at her for a long moment, and then he sighed. A heavy, defeated sound. "You stay in the car," he said. "No matter what happens, you stay in the car. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "I mean it, Clara. You stay in that car, or I will personally drag you back to the penthouse myself." "I understand." She met his eyes. "I promise." He nodded once, sharp and final. "Then let's go get him back." The Moretti compound was a sprawling estate on the outskirts of the city, hidden behind high walls and iron gates. It looked almost peaceful in the fading daylight. Elegant, expensive, the kind of place where old money hosted garden parties and charity galas. But Clara knew what waited inside. She sat in the back of a black SUV parked half a mile from the main entrance, watching through tinted windows as Thomas and his men disappeared into the trees. They moved like ghosts, silent, coordinated, invisible. And then the shooting started. Clara pressed her hands over her ears, but she couldn't block out the sounds, the rapid crack of gunfire, the shouts, the screams. It went on, an eternity compressed into minutes, and Clara sat in that car, with her heart in her throat, and her nails digging into her palms, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Please let him be alive. Please let him be okay. Please, please, please. And then, silence. Clara's breath stopped. The door of the SUV flew open. Thomas stood there, his face streaked with dirt and blood, his chest heaving. But he was smiling. "We got him," he said. "He's alive." Clara was out of the car before she knew she was moving, running toward the compound, ignoring Thomas's shouts behind her. She tore through the gates, past bodies she didn't look at, through doors that hung off their hinges, and there, in a room at the back of the house, she found him. Marcus was tied to a chair, his face bruised and bloody, his shirt torn. But his eyes, those pale gray eyes, were open. And when he saw her, something broke across his face. "Clara." His voice was hoarse, cracked. "Clara, you shouldn't be here." She was already at his side, her hands fumbling with the ropes that bound him. Don't you ever do this to me again, do you understand? I thought..." Her voice broke. "I thought I'd lost you." "Never." He caught her face in his hands the moment he was free, pulling her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I will always come back to you. Always." She kissed him, tasting blood and salt and desperation, feeling the solid warmth of him against her. Alive, alive, alive. "Let's go home," she whispered. "Yes," he breathed. "Let's go home." The wedding was postponed by a month while Marcus recovered. Clara spent every day at his side, changing bandages, forcing him to eat, arguing with him when he tried to go back to work too soon. She watched the bruises fade from purple to green to yellow, watched the cuts heal into scars, watched the shadows in his eyes slowly lift. And through it all, she felt something shifting inside her, something settling, solidifying. She'd walked into a war zone for this man. She'd risked everything, her safety, her life, because the thought of losing him was worse than any fear she'd ever known. That was love. Real love. The kind that didn't flinch, didn't waver, didn't run when things got hard. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that he felt the same way about her. They were married on a Saturday in June, in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside the city. Clara wore white, a simple gown with a fitted bodice and a flowing skirt that made her feel like something out of a fairy tale. Marcus wore black, because of course he did, and when he saw her walking toward him down the aisle, his face did something she'd never seen before. He cried. Just a few tears, quickly blinked away, but she saw them. And she carried that image with her for the rest of her life. Marcus called her the most powerful and feared man she'd ever known, brought to tears by the sight of her in a white dress. The vows they exchanged were simple. No poetry, no elaborate promises, just the truth. "I was broken when I met you," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I was afraid, and I was alone, and I had stopped believing that anyone would ever see me. Really see me." She squeezed his hands. "But you did. You saw me. And you didn't just save me from the man who was hunting me. You saved me from the life I'd settled for. The small life. The safe life. You showed me that I was brave enough for something bigger." She smiled through her tears. "I love you, Marcus. I love who you are, and who you're becoming, and who we are together. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." Marcus's jaw was tight, his eyes bright. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I've done things, he said quietly. Things I can't undo. Things that would make most people run. But you didn't run. He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek. You stayed. You fought for me. You walked into a firefight because you couldn't stand the thought of losing me. A pause. No one has ever loved me like that. And I will spend every day of my life earning it. I will protect you. I will honor you. I will cherish you. Not because you need protecting, but because you deserve someone who would burn down the world for you. He brought her hands to his lips. I love you, Clara. More than I knew I was capable of. And I will never, ever let you go. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. And when Marcus kissed her, deep and slow and full of promise, Clara felt something click into place inside her chest. This was it. This was where she was meant to be. The reception was held under a canopy of white lights, with music and laughter and champagne flowing like water. Clara danced with Marcus until her feet ached, then danced some more. She laughed until her cheeks hurt. She hugged Margaret, who'd made the trip despite her fear of flying, and she shook hands with men whose names she'd probably never know, and whose work she'd probably never fully understand. And when the night finally wound down, when the guests had departed and the music had faded and the stars had come out in full force, she and Marcus stood alone on the terrace, looking out at the vineyard bathed in moonlight. So, Marcus said, sliding an arm around her waist, how does it feel to be Mrs. Calder? Clara leaned into him, breathing in the scent of him, cologne and wine and something that was just him. It feels, she said slowly, like the beginning of something. Something good? She turned to face him, rising on her toes to press a kiss to his jaw. Something extraordinary. He smiled, that rare, radiant smile that still made her heart skip. I have to warn you, he said. Life with me is never going to be easy. There will always be enemies. There will always be danger. There will always be things I can't tell you, places I can't take you. I know. And you're okay with that? Clara thought about the woman she'd been a year and a half ago. The woman who'd been hunted. The woman who'd been failed by every system designed to protect her. The woman who'd stood alone in a parking lot and waited to die. She wasn't that woman anymore. She was someone new, someone stronger. Someone who'd learned that safety wasn't the absence of danger. It was knowing that you had someone who would face the danger with you. I'm more than okay with it, she said. I chose this life. I chose you. And I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Marcus pulled her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Then let's go make a life together, he murmured against her hair. Clara smiled, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Yes, she whispered. Let's. And as they stood there under the stars, husband and wife, partners in everything, Clara knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. She had walked through fire to get here. She had survived terror and heartbreak, and a love so intense it had remade her from the inside out. And now, finally, she was home. Not the penthouse with its gleaming floors and glittering views. Not the vineyard with its rolling hills and endless sky. Home was simpler than that. Home was the man holding her in his arms. Home was the life they were building together, one day at a time. Home was this, and it was everything she'd ever wanted.